But for the wolves, it's not a rule. It's just a stable behavioral pattern. And so we acted like wolf troops or chimpanzee troops, all of that. And, well, and for untold, really untold tens and perhaps hundreds of millions of years before we were able to formulate that pattern of behavior in anything approximating a story or an image, and even longer before we could articulate it as a set of ethical rules. And I'm dwelling on this. I know I've repeated some of this before, but it's so important because, you know, there's this tremendous push, especially from the social constructionists, to make the case that ethics is arbitrary, morality is relative, there's no fundamental biological grounding in relationship to human behavior, especially in the category of ethics. And I think that that's, well, first of all, it's dangerous because that means that people are anything you want to turn them into, and you bloody well better be careful of people who think that. And second, I just think that the evidence that that's wrong is so overwhelming that we should just stop thinking that way. I mean, and that's partly why I'm also attacking this from an evolutionary perspective. There's lots of converging lines of evidence that ethical standards at least of the most crucial sort not only evolve but also spontaneously reemerge, for example, in the dramatic play of children. So we need to take that seriously. And so, well, that's partly what we're doing here, trying to take that seriously. So, okay, so the idea there, at least in part, was that the father employed the son to generate habitable order out of chaos. I also think there might be something more proximally true about that as well, too, because one of the things we do know, here's something that's cool about men. Men are much more criminal than women. And that, by the way, that does not look like it's sociocultural, partly because it peaks when testosterone kicks in around 14, like it just spikes the hell up. And then it stays pretty high until about 27. And so standard penological theory, for those of you who don't know this, is that if you have a repeat offender, you know, a guy, he just won't stop getting in trouble, you just throw him in prison until he's 28. And it isn't like you're rehabilitating him or anything. It's like by 28, he's done with his criminal career because the crime curve peaks at 15 and then falls down around 27 or so, it burns out. And that's often, by the way, that's often when men get married and settle down and stabilize. One of the things that's cool about that is the creativity curve for men is almost exactly the same thing. It ramps up when testosterone kicks in, and then it starts to flatten out around 27. The curves match very, very closely. So that's quite cool. It's the creativity element of it that I'm particularly interested in, because creativity is, in many ways, an attribute of youth. And that's, look, I mean, if you looked at that sentence and you stripped it of its religious context, what you would say is that, well, the older people use the younger people to generate creative ideas and renew the world. It's like, yeah, that's what happens. And we also have no idea how many of the things that we discovered or invented as human beings were stumbled across by children and adolescents. You know, because they're much more exploratory. They're less constrained by their already extant knowledge structures, and they're less conservative. So, yeah, that seems just right to me. So, and right in an extraordinarily important way. Because it also means that if you're an actual father, one of the things that it means is that that's part of what you should be encouraging your son to do, right? Which is because the role of a father is to encourage. That is clearly the role. And to encourage is to say, well, go out there, confront the chaos of the unknown and the chaos that underlies everything, and grapple with it, because you can do it. You're as big as the chaos itself, and do something useful as a consequence, and make your life better and make everyone else's life better, and you can do it. And man, that's the right thing to tell. That's the right thing to tell young men. And now, talking to young women is more complicated because they have more, let's say, issues to deal with, because their lives are more complicated in some ways. But that's definitely the right thing to be telling your son. And one of the things that I've really noticed recently, since I've been lecturing, especially in the last 7 or 8 months, most of my audience has been young men, and I've talked a lot to them about both truth and responsibility. And I think that those are the two things that underlie this capacity. And there seems to me to be a tremendous hunger for that idea. It's not the same idea as rights, you know. It's a very different idea. It's the counterpart to rights. And so it's, you know, life is hard, it's chaotic, it's difficult, it's really definitely a challenge. And so you can either shrink from that, and no bloody wonder, because, you know, it's going to kill you. It's no joke, man. Or you can forthrightly confront it and try to do something about it. Well, what's better? And then you say to the person, look, man, you could do it. Like, that's what a human being is like. And if you just stood up and got yourself together, and you'd find out by trying that you can, in fact, do that. And I do think that that's a great core religious message, as far as I can tell, and I think that's deeply embedded in this sort of idea. So, all right, so this is what I've been telling you. This is something like how knowledge itself is generated. First of all, there's the unknown as such, and that's really what you don't know anything about. And generally, when you encounter that, you don't encounter it with thought. You encounter it like this, right? And that's the first representation of the absolutely unknown. It's something that is beyond your comprehension, and it's terrifying. And because it's beyond your comprehension, you cannot perceive it, you cannot understand it, but you still have to deal with it. And the way you deal with it is that you freeze. That's what a basilisk does, say, to the kids in Harry Potter, right? They take a look at it and they freeze. And that's the snake, the terrible snake of chaos that lives underneath everything. You see that thing freezes you. And that's because you're a prey animal. But at the same time, it makes you curious. And so that's the first level of contact with the absolute unknown, is the emotional combination of freezing and curiosity. And that's reflected, I think, in the dragon stories. The dragon is the terrible thing that lives underground that hoards gold or hoards virgins. Very, very strange behavior for a reptile, as we pointed out before. But the idea is that it's a symbolic representation of the predatory quality of the unknown combined with the capacity of the unknown to generate nothing but novel information. And you can see that as very characteristic of human beings, because we are prey animals. But we're also unbelievably exploratory, and we're pretty damn good predators. And we occupy this weird cognitive niche. And so one of the things we've learned is that if we forthrightly confront the unknown, terrifying as it is, there's a massive prize to be gained continually. And so that seems to be true, right? As true as anything is. And then I would also say that idea, now we know that one of the metaphors that underlies God's extraction of habitable order out of chaos at the beginning of time is an older idea, and a more archaic idea, that God confronted something like the Leviathan. That's one of the words for this serpent-like chaos creature that's often used in the Old Testament, or there's the Leviathan and the Behemoth. Yeah, that's the other thing. And so there's this idea that I think probably came from the Mesopotamians, that God, either in the son-like aspect or in the father-like aspect, is the thing that confronts this terrible beast that represents the chaotic unknown and cuts it into pieces, and then sometimes gives the body parts to the populace in order to feed them. So you can see a hunting metaphor there as well, but it's deeper than that. And so, all right, so the first thing is that there's the absolute unknown, and the unknown is what you do not understand. It's what's beyond the campfire. Maybe it's what's beyond the tree, even more anciently, you know, when we lived in trees. It's out there where you don't know. And what's out there? Crocodiles and snakes and birds of prey and cats and all sorts of things, like predatory cats, and they will eat you. But there's utility in going out there to find out what's there. Like maybe you go and you don't kill the snake, you kill the damn nest of snakes. And that makes you pretty popular, just as you should be. And that accelerates your reproductive potential, let's say. And we're descended from people who did that. And so we have this notion about how the world is structured that's deeply embedded in our psyche. Like really, really deeply, way, way down, way below the surface cognition. Way down in the limbic system, in these ancient parts of the brain that are like 60 million years old or 100 million years old or older than that. Ancient, ancient brain structures. And so the first thing we do is we act out our encounter with the unknown world. And we act that out in the same way, in a manner that's analogous to the manner that's presented as a description of what it is that God does at the beginning of time to extract habitable order out of chaos. And I won't tell you about the other part of that for now. So you act it out first. And then the second thing is, you watch people who act it out and you start to make representations of that. That's stories, right? And maybe you admire them. And then after a long time, you collect a bunch of those stories, and then you can say what that is. You can articulate it as a pattern. And so, and this is something Nietzsche also figured out to begin with, you know, because prior to Nietzsche, I would say, he did so many things first. It was quite remarkable. You know, there was an idea that you first think and then you act. And people like to think that, but of course you know it's complete bloody rubbish because you're as impulsive as you can possibly imagine. You're always doing things before you think. And sometimes that's a really good idea. So the idea that you see things and then think and then act, it's like, yeah, really? No, I'm sorry. I don't do that. No one I know does that, and they certainly don't do that when they're emotional. You know, you act first. And one of the things that Nietzsche said very clearly was that our ideas emerged out of the ground of our action over thousands and thousands of years. And then when philosophers were putting forward those ideas, what they were doing wasn't generating creative ideas. They were just telling the story of humanity.